Hello, my name is Julia Woning and today I'm going to show you how I create this lovely lighthouse with the Derwent Inktense paint pen set in my art journal. Prepare the paper by sticking it down on a board. I draw the lines with the line maker, a water resistant fine liner from Derwent. Now I'm mixing the blue color with water in the palette. I'm using a push button water brush from Derwent. And paint the sky. Around the clouds. Leave them open. Bring the watercolor in the sky. And with a tissue paper, created a nice outer line from those clouds in the wet surface. Taking the excess water away. Then in the middle, a little bit blue. Maybe some more water. Some extra blue pigments. The pigments will flow in the water. Tap it down with the tissue paper and let it dry. Then a darker color. I created a dark color with the blue and the brown. And with the water brush, I wet the surface first and then we'll bring the dark pigments in that surface. So this is the wet on wet technique. Bringing those colors in the wet surface. Around the lighthouse, straight line, the clouds, more pigments, blue, brown, and mix it all up. Bringing those darker pigments in the wet surface. Around the lighthouse, underneath the clouds. On the outside of the clouds. Building it up with tissue paper. Creating the light back in those clouds. Bring the light back in the clouds. With the tissue paper. Then again with the brush. Then with the same brush, I give some different touches with the watercolor, brown and blue, in the cloud. Give those pigments in the wet surface and let them float. So again, brown and blue with water, and then on the other side, the clouds, a horizontal line, underneath those clouds. Some extra pigment. Let those pigments flow in the wet surface. Wet on wet. Next to the lighthouse, some extra dark pigments. Then with water, making it lighter on the outside of those clouds. Again to the blue sky. Some extra water. We have to create white by leaving the paper open. Some tissue paper bringing the white back from the paper. So we don't work with white pigments. I'm working with the white of the paper. Bringing the dark back in those clouds. Always looking at the reference photo where there is dark in those clouds, where there is light. Try to captivate the atmosphere of those clouds. Again, that was too much, a little bit tissue paper to get the excess water away. Building those layers up, getting it darker. So from big to small and from light till dark. Now I want to create a warm color in those clouds with red, orange, ochre, water with another brush and bring it into those clouds. The sun color is coming through those clouds. But you have to be aware that a yellow-orange color, when you mix that with the blue, you get a green color, and that's not what we want. So be careful with that orange and yellow in those clouds. Here and there. Bring the light in those clouds. Some extra red. Yellow. Now underneath those clouds, a warm color. So between the sea and the clouds there is a warm sky with an orange, red feel to it. Some extra yellow. And leave that white open. Some dark color, some shade of the clouds in the distance. In the wet surface, again wet on wet. Let those pigments flow in each other. Some extra warmth in the sky, in those clouds. Layer upon layer. More warmth in those clouds. Building it up, layer by layer. Some dark underneath those clouds. Then I'll create a color of the rooftops. You know it's red, but it's not. If you see the reference photo, it's more like a brown red. So I will create that color by mixing color together. The red, the blue, brown, more red, some ochre tint, some extra water, and then I will give those rooftops a color. Maybe it's too dark, more red, more orange, more warm color, and give every rooftop that red brown color. And the wall is also, it's more brown, so a little bit ochre. Give it color. Clean up your brush. More ochre, more blue. Just mix around the color that you prefer. And give those rocks a color. The cliff where the lighthouse is standing on, and be aware of the light of those rocks, so leave that open. Play around with different tints of brown and gray. Even those rocks in the water, they are darker. Give it a different touch with your brush. Try to captivate those rocks, and this is the first layer. Around the cliff, getting more dark colors, even with the blue and the brown. Bringing those rocks in the wet surface. And be aware that you leave some white spots open. That makes your painting of a watercolor more open, more vivid, if you know what I mean. And that's the trickiest part of a watercolor, to leave some spots open. But practice. Look where there is contrast, where there is dark, where there is a shade in those cliffs and in those rocks, even underneath. There is a fence that I have to give color. Then I create a green color with several greens. Light and a dark green, ochre. And you see me using a different way of applying the watercolor with this brush to get the different touch on the paper. Be aware of that you can do that you can play around with those different touches and create different kinds of watercolor movement on your paper. Also here, leave some white spots open and create the green. The grass, the bushes. Around next to the house. There are some rocks of the cliff too, so give them color. Leave some white spots open. Underneath. and some extra color in those rocks near to the water, near to the sea. Some more contrast, more shade. Shade in the houses. Those rooftops are already dry, so that's why I can place another color next to it, because when it is wet they will flow in each other, so you have to be patient when you want to have another color next to another color. Some shade in the lighthouse, left side, right side. Clean my brush, and with a wet but clean brush I will make a nice color in those, so you get more depth in the lighthouse that way. Blue, brown, a little bit black. I rarely use black. When I'm using black, I always mix it up with another color. So here I mix it up with blue, brown and black for the lighthouse details. That was too much. A little bit of tissue paper on the top of it. More shade. Those little windows and doors are darker, so give them more contrast. Some extra color and shade in those rocks near the sea. In the cliff. And building it up. Every time I'm going darker now, and I'm going smaller with my brush strokes. Now I'm creating a dark color, more blue color to create the water, the sea. I place the sea against the horizon, and that one is dry, because if it was wet, the dark blue will float into the sky, and that's not what you want. You want to have a very horizontal line for the horizon, so you have to be patient, and when the sky is fully dry you can lay down your watercolor for the water, for the sea. Leave those white near the rocks open. We're not putting white on this painting. We have to create the white to leave it open. The white of the paper is the white of the water. Building it up, layer upon layer. Every time you're getting the sea darker. Play around with your brush. Sometimes you're taking the excess color away with a tissue paper and then again applying watercolor with your brush. It's just looking for the right contrast and the right movement in the water. Building those layers up. Blue, brown, mix those together and create more contrast. What happens now, because I color the water now, the lighthouse is becoming white, and that's because we're making the contrast of the water darker, and that's why your lighter spots on your paper will be wider. So now you have a white lighthouse, not even using white paint, just by coloring the right color around the lighthouse. Creating the water near to those rocks. Leave those white spots open, creating darker water. Building it up layer by layer, getting more contrast in the water. More contrast in those rocks, in the cliff. Darker next to the cliff, creating shade. And when you're creating shade, you're creating depth in your painting. You're creating depth by placing white and dark next to each other. Be aware of the contrast in your painting. Some last dark details under the rooftops and those windows. Getting it a little bit darker. In those bushes, that was too much. Take the excess color with the tissue paper. The Derwent Inktense is a light, fast watercolor, and after drying it's water resistant. That's unique for watercolor because normally watercolor is water soluble. This is the first set. There is also a second set with 12 different colors, and there's a studio set with 24 colors. I hope you enjoyed this video, me creating this lovely lighthouse. Until the next time, bye!